This is the Infrastructure Matters podcast, brought to you by the Futurum Group. We explore the latest developments in hybrid cloud computing and the technology that underpins it. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the latest trends and technologies that are shaping the hybrid cloud computing landscape. The Infrastructure Matters podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only. Please do not take anything reflected in this show as investment advice. Now your co-hosts, Steven Dickens, Camberley Bates, and Krista Macomber of the Futurum Group.
Hello and welcome to episode 22 of Infrastructure Matters. My name is Krista Macomber. I'm joined here fresh off the road from AWS reInvent as Camberley Bates and Steven Dickens, my co-hosts. Camberley and Steven, how are you feeling this morning?
I don't know whether I'd describe it as fresh off the road. I think sort of a little weary and stumbling back into the office is probably a bit more accurate. Camberley looks fantastic as always, but I'm kind of a little bit jet lagged and a little bit struggling this morning.
Yep.
I'm going to just ditto with him because I feel like I've been run over by a truck. I got the license plate of the truck.
Oh my goodness. Well, it's
and
always
it was called
of...
AWS 123.
Yes. Yep.
Oh, fantastic.
Well, always a sign of a very good, productive week, and we'll get to that in just a second. Before we do, I did want to call out, so the Infrastructure Matters podcast, this past week, while Camberley and Steven were busy at AWS reInvent, we actually were ranked number 2 in the top 8 podcasts for cloud computing by Techopedia, number 2. So we wanted to do just a quick call out and, a thank you to that recognition. We're very excited, and we'll be sure to link to that article here in our show notes. So we wanted to jump right into our discussion of the show. And to kind of kick it off, I know there was a ton of buzz around the show. There's actually over 60,000 attendees. Camberley and Steven, I know we were kind of just talking about that off camera before we jumped in. A very active show floor, it looks like, based on the photos, certainly very much getting, kind of back to and actually far surpassing the pre-COVID levels. I know that AWS itself had over 250 announcements at the show. And of course, it was packed with partners having a bunch of announcements as well. I know I was just kind of referencing that very packed show floor. And for the Futurum Group and our team, I know between us and the 6.5, actually, we recorded 17 videos, several of which were actually from the beautiful top 60th floor of the Wynn kind of hotel and casino. So very, very busy week for our team as well. And I know we wanted to give a big thank you to our production team and, of course, all of the analysts, including yourselves that were there. Camberley, Steven,
echo the comments on the production team. Round of applause to those guys. Just 17 videos in 3 days is just, it's impressive.
Absolutely tremendous. So with that, I mean, I guess I'd like to turn it over to you, Camberley and Steven. You were obviously there, feet on the street all the week. So what are some of your perceptions coming out of the show?
Well, first of all, we kicked off with an analyst days. They flew us in for Sunday, which was a sports day, and taking us through a lot of the work that they're doing. Amazing work that's being done with the sports and facility. And then they took us over to the NFL game that was over at the Allegiant, which was great. And there's a lot of people that saw Mark Allen came by the booth and where we were, and is like, wow, okay, so I got to see him. But I think one of the things that I saw there was the amazing work that's being done with data analytics and data analysis, which I think we do know there's a lot of chips that are in, like the puck and the football and all that they're gathering the data in. But what you don't know is that they're putting chips on the pads and what they're wearing. And that data is going into being all gathered in. That you can imagine that kind of information that's being used by the different sports teams in their analysis there. That just gives you some ideas. But they also had the soccers and the golf folks and those areas. The second day, on Monday, we were there with all the analysts, and we kicked off with an analyst day before we even got into the keynotes that were happening. And they did a bunch of pre-announcements, laid out kind of what was going to be happening, and getting us ready to kind of march through the next few days, which was, as we already mentioned, is pretty exhausting in terms of our measurement of how many miles. I think I logged about 30 miles on walking around. That does not count
Good
the
for
workout.
the steps. Good for the steps. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah, those are the steps. So with that, what Steve and I would like to talk about is some of the big themes that were there, and probably the biggest theme, was Gen AI or AI period, and what they rolled out. And Steve's going to talk about that. But the other two big ones that I took away from there is one. This is my theme. They kind of said this: hybrid is here. They acknowledged that hybrid is here. And they didn't fight. It was like, okay, this is here. We're going to deal with it. And that meant that cloud migration, cost optimization, all those items was here as well.
Yeah, so the big thing that came out of the show for me, there was a couple of sort of big announcements. Q, which Matt Wood talked us through on the sort of pre-brief session that Camberley was talking about. The interesting thing for me, before we get into it, is why it was called Q after the quartermaster in the 007 sort of James Bond movies. I thought that was it kind of encapsulated for me everything about what they're trying to achieve with Q. That helpful can help you out with whether you need whatever you need in order to get your job done. Q is going to be there for you. So I thought that was a great reference. Great throwaway line from Matt that Amazon owns MGM Studios, so they didn't have any issues with the trademark, which I thought was fantastic. But no, I mean, all joking aside, I think the other key takeaway for me with Q was Amazon and AWS, they're product-led businesses. 2 pizza teams, go get a service launched, 250 announcements this week. He kind of acknowledged this when he was talking us through it, that they've taken a more thoughtful approach and not put co-pilots or AI assist or whatever you want to call it into every product, which would have been a natural thing for, I think, AWS to have done, given how they structured. It was more thoughtful. It was kind of above the product level, beyond the service level, and really trying to put a overall position in place with Q. So, I mean, interesting for the developer, interesting for the cloud admin. I think that's going to get widely deployed and widely used. I mean, my only concern with AWS is just the sheer volume of services. And Adam Solipsky talked about this, 60% more services than their next biggest competitor. That's obviously fantastic. It's obviously great. There's a lot of optionality there. I've heard other people talking about there's 28 different ways to run Kubernetes on AWS. That's kind of frankly daunting for a lot of the admins. So something like Q to be able to sort of simplify, make it easier, make it more easy to navigate. The other big announcement for me was around their custom silicon, updates to Graviton for Generation 4 and Trainium version 2. I think, with everybody now in the hyperscaler space having their own custom silicon, they were very keen to say, we've been at this for a while. 2018 was when they launched Graviton. It's on Generation 4. So there was some, in the closed rooms, a bit more barbed comments around, we've been at this. We're not just talking about it. It's been in production. I think it was 10,000 clients now running Graviton. workloads. That's impressive for me. So I think that was the other key takeaway. There's a research note that Daniel, Raffo, and myself have published on that. So if you want more details, take a look there.
So to that end, one of the things that did come out as well is their recognition of the complexity of what's going on. And so they are starting to address, they didn't exactly use these words, but I'll use them, solutions approach. So you'll start to see maybe how they're, and especially how they rolled out the AI pieces of it. They showed it as a layered cake. Starting out with a base infrastructure, the next piece of it is the data management piece of it, the next piece of it is the systems environment, and the last piece of it is the application area. So they are recognizing that. I mean, they're, one of their key competitors being Microsoft. They're well known for packaging certain things and bringing out packaging. Google had done the same thing with their analytics space, is more packaging, whereas the way that Amazon has gone to market is this very, very much so, as you said, the two pizza product teams going out there, which is why you have 250 announcements, is because you've got, 250 teams working on whatever the next generation and announcements, press releases that they're going to be putting out. So,
yeah, it was interesting. There was a chart that Adam put up in his keynote: 60% more services and 40% more features than our next competition. Now, he obviously positioned that as really good, but there's some dissonance for me between 60% more services and only 40% more features.
mm-hmm.
Is that too many services? And then the other point that resonated for me is, Microsoft's doing fantastically with their public cloud, Google the same. Do you really need 60% more services to be the number one, or arguably in the space? Is that complexity? We talked about it in one of the database and data layer. They put up a logo chart and a services chart, and I've took pictures of those just because I need to go back and do some work. There's a lot of options, maybe too many options. All of the partners were there. All of the AWS native services were there. It was an eye chart to consume, and I just wonder. There was a gentleman, I'm blanking on his name, who's there, who's going to be picking up a role around verticals. I don't know whether you were in that briefing with me, Camberley, but it's going to be interesting to see how they evolve and go forward with packaging, as you mentioned, vertical focus, kind of more curation of services. But that was that was one of the things that kind of was rolling through my mind through the entire event.
And the beauty of that also is that spurs the industry partners, and the need for systems integrators, for GSIs, for partners to help clients get through what do I need to do. And that also plays into, some of the things that Vogel talked about yesterday. He did a presentation on, I think it was the frugal architect, I think is what it was called.
Yeah.
But talking about architecting, once you're up there, really architecting for your cost effectiveness, cost optimization, performance, etc. So there's this huge skill and opportunity for people to step into with that. With complexity, there's opportunity.
Yeah.
And also flexibility that goes there. Well, maybe we should, Krista, go into some of the announcements that were going on, just to kind of highlight some of the big areas that each of us kind of traipse after and take a look at. I know you mentioned the processors, Steve. The couple of areas that, one of the big ones that was they headed off with. I love it. Adam heads off with storage. That was the first one he highlighted.
I thought of you when he went there. I'm like, I'm sitting 2 seats away from Camberley, and I'm thinking she's going to love this.
Yeah, he knows where his money is, because that makes a lot of the data storage makes a lot of money for them in profitability. But anyway, the big one was S3 Express 1 Zone. Roll that off your tongue. I have to look it up every time I have to say it, because it's not the name is not memorable. What it is memorable, though. What they've done is, what we've seen is that object storage, or S3, if you want to call that, is going into a high performance mode. It's serving new areas that have to do high performance computing, gaming, etc. And so this is an offering to address that market. And that specifically what they've done is they've taken the S3, put it into one AZ, which reduces the latency that you have when you have the capabilities that it has. So now we're down into millisecond latency. It's 10 times faster than the S3 standard, and that means that it's opening up the door for data protection, et cetera, because you need to have data protection. So you saw Haiku, Veritas, Commvault announce with it, as well as Vicinity, which is another company which is really interesting is going to be helping them move the data into S3, because there's only 4 AZs right now that this is sitting in. And talking to the folks that are involved with this, there are some really big companies that are looking at this because it does address some major issues that you need to have addressed in terms of performance within the S3 space. So with that, I'll kind of turn it over to my friend Krista and talk about her stuff.
Sure. Remotely, I did actually cover Camberley. They had a couple of new features on the data protection front, and from my perspective, there's very much of a parallel in terms of what we were just commenting on from kind of a macro level for AWS. So Steven and Camberley, as you were talking, I was kind of nodding my head a lot and really thinking a lot of signs in terms of pointing to AWS really kind of taking that next step in terms of kind of becoming that even more mature, kind of enterprise grade player, right? So I think, of course, we're seeing obviously a lot of enterprises are relying on a variety of AWS services, but trying to reduce that complexity and kind of package things up to be more consumable. I think that's kind of an important next step for them, in addition to continuing to fill out kind of those feature capabilities. So for me, that was kind of a story that we're seeing in the data protection space. So a couple things that jumped out from that perspective to me were, so for AWS backup, they added the ability to automatically test recoveries. And similarly, with the AWS disaster recovery service, DRS, the ability to automate the validation of EC2 instances that are used for recovery, as well as things like network connectivity and the availability of free storage space. So looking at kind of where AWS has been sitting in data protection, I'm not necessarily sold yet that they're going to go ahead and try to compete against some of these partners that you were just mentioning a couple minutes ago, Camberley, the likes of a Haiku or a Rubrik, and kind of some of those third-party backup and data protection providers. But where it is making sense and where their customer base may be asking for it, beginning to kind of fill out some of those capabilities. So from my perspective, that was kind of, really the takeaway there. And specifically when we think about validating and testing recovery capabilities, when we look at the data protection market, that's becoming more and more important these days because, of course, we're seeing, the onslaught of cyber attacks. So organizations are facing the pressure to prove that they can recover. And that's from the standpoint of different legislation that they need to comply with. And it's also really just, pressure from the business, right? So IT operations teams, whether or not they're in a highly regulated industry or region, they're getting asked by the business to be able to say, hey, okay, if we are faced with one of these cyber attacks, we can hit these certain recovery times and we can make sure that we're going to, achieve this level of minimizing data loss. So those were kind of two of the bigger things that jumped out to me from the data protection space, and certainly some parallels with that macro level view there.
Yeah, so for me, over and above the Q and the Graviton and sort of Trainium sort of chip announcement, the other one that sort of in my space that came out, there was a joint collaboration with Kyndryl. I sort of got pre-briefed on that prior to the event and sort of commented in their press release announcement. The AWS M2, their sort of managed mainframe migration service. Kyndryl's got kind of probably definitely the largest mainframe outsourced sort of installed base with over 6 million MIPS under management. They've got probably the biggest bench, or maybe even more than probably, definitely the biggest bench of mainframe skills. But they're going further than that and have sort of connected in the Kyndryl Bridge technology, which is kind of how you manage Kyndryl services. There's a real sort of deep technical integration with Kyndryl. It gets super techie and super nerdy. So maybe we'll link to that in the show notes so you can read our coverage. Me and Dave Raffo have put some coverage together on that. But I think I met with a number of different vendors. We recorded some video with Neil Fowler. I think AWS is really leaning into that mainframe modernization space and providing optionality. The other one that on a collaboration piece, while I'm talking about IBM, was that DB2 now runs on as a service on AWS. I think if you'd have said that to anybody 5 years ago, they would have just spat their drink out and just laughed and called you crazy.
But this is giving to that first theme. Hybrid is here. Cloud migration, right?
Yeah.
And what they said is they're meeting where the customers are, which is this is where they're at. It's their enterprise. If they want to engage in this, you're going to have to say, I have to look at their environment, and no, they're not going to convert the DB2. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. So I think it was. I mean, they gave us an outpost update as well. I think there's, the level of pragmatism is very different to where it was 5 years ago. Hybrid platforms like DB2. Customers have got massive investments there, and they're going to keep them. So the answer is not just move it to a new, AWS native database service and just throw everything away as you move. People are going to be more pragmatic than that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what we within that we had a Q&A with Adam and the CEO after some of the keynotes, et cetera, for about an hour. And one of the questions, a couple of the different questions we were asked that were along these lines, which, what is the tailwind for the company? What is the headwind for the company, et cetera? And the tailwind is pretty much obviously for everybody, and we can see with the earnings and everything else that came out this week, is the AI and how rapidly that is going. And it's not just lean, mean startup companies. We had a presentation from Travelers Insurance, a 160-year-old company that is doing some amazing, amazing things in implementation, and they're doing it jointly with AWS. So which means they're doing it in the cloud. So take that one on. And they have got a mainframe someplace back there. The second one is what the headwind is. And he talked about, there's a general uncertainty in the industry, actually in the economy for everybody. I think there's uncertainty. They don't know, there's so much dynamics going on within the geopolitical world as well as our own nation, that there is this cautiousness. And where that builds into the strategy is this cost optimization. And how do we really work with our customers to look at how do we make sure that they're really using the systems and taking advantage of the systems. And we saw on stage with Werner's presentation yesterday as well, people talking about what they had done strategically and looked at it. And one of the big names that I'll call out is Nubank, the born in the cloud bank that's servicing countries like Brazil, and how they have gone through and redesigned within a point that I think about. This is how our architects on premise redesigned. You're looking at everything from the code to the networking to the entire piece of it, looking at, so it's the same skill base or similar skill base. It's not the same. It's a similar skill base to what was there, on what we've had on-prem, but we've now lifted it to this another area so it doesn't disappear. It's not like jobs are disappearing here because they're really, really needing the folks up there. So that was another piece I'll bring out.
Mm-hmm. Certainly.
Busy week. Busy week. We could record this for the next 3 hours.
I know.
Yeah, I feel like I've just scratched
I
the
know.
surface on here about what's been rolled out.
I know. And as we mentioned, kind of throughout the discussion, plenty of content coming out. We had a number of videos that were recorded, number of, research notes. So, kind of the content engine is going to be continuing to be firing on all cylinders here coming out of AWS. And because it was not a busy enough week or kind of time period since we last recorded, in our last couple of minutes here, we did want to touch on the close of the acquisition of VMware by Broadcom. Obviously, some pretty big ramifications in the industry. I know we've kind of gotten some details in terms of how things are going to shake out. I believe VMware is going to continue to operate as 4 distinct units, one for Cloud Foundation, one for Tanzu, one for the software-defined edge and kind of application space, and another for networking and security. So with that, Steve and Camberley, anything you wanted to comment on regarding that before we close out here for this session?
I mean, obviously the press is full of a lot of the layoffs that have been announced. I mean,
Yep.
Obviously that's horrible for individuals involved, especially the time of year, but I think it's no surprise to anybody. We've been seeing this play out. The team at Broadcom do a very, very good job of running a flat organization. We're really exposed to some of their team. Hock is hands-on. There's not layers between him and the business unit leaders. They do a very good job of the efficiency of the back end, so the HR, the sort of finance functions, which is fantastic for shareholders, and you've seen that with Broadcom's share price over the last year. So I think, yes, it's horrible on a personal level, but I think it's not surprising. I think the structure that you just mentioned and the 4 business units, Raghu's going to stay on as a technical advisor. Sumit, who was the president there, looks to be moving on, which is a shame. I was impressed with him. Obviously things sort of change and people move on. If you want to see the coverage, Daniel and Patrick got time to spend with Hawk to really sort of drill down on where he sees the vision for the company. That was part of the announcement on day of close. I think the way I look at it, yes, there's going to be some not great headlines in the first few weeks of this, but I'm super bullish long term. Hawks and the team have briefed us, $2 billion of investment coming in. I think VMware wasn't a bed of roses before the acquisition. It was growing at single digits. Given their portfolio, it should be double-digit growth, not single-digit growth. So I think streamlining some of the product portfolio. Camberley, keep me honest, was it 120,000 SKUs that they told us they had?
I can't remember, but it was a lot.
Ridiculous. That's bloat that needs to be trimmed down. So I think what you'll see is a more streamlined, more focused, more invested in, slicker business that pops out of this maybe 3 months from now. Being super pragmatic, it's going to take a while for the organization to digest some of the personnel changes and people to sort of understand where they fit. Even maybe not the super short term, but the short term and the medium term, and definitely the long term, I'm bullish.
Absolutely. All right, with that, I am very impressed that we were able to keep this within our 30 minutes here. But it's I think already time.
I'm impressed we're able to stay awake, basically.
Certainly. So
it's going to be one of those ways we get off and go, we should have mentioned that.
Right.
What about that? And I'm going to say to all my buddies out there
announcements out of 250. Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry, I didn't do a call out to you too. There we go.
Every product manager that we ignored in this podcast, we apologize. You did great work.
Absolutely. All right, with that, Camberley, Steven, thank you so much. I'm going to let you guys go and hopefully get some rest as we look to head into this weekend. And we wanted to thank everybody for joining us, episode 22 already. As always, please make sure that you like and subscribe to make sure that you don't miss any future episodes. I know it's getting into the holiday season here in the United States, but still a ton of, kind of travel events and plenty to keep us rolling into the new year. So we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thank you all so much.
Have a good one.